Night falls quietly over a small town in Iowa, but one house refuses to sleep. The Villisca Axe Murder House stands frozen in time, its wooden walls soaked with a pain that never faded. On a warm summer night in 1912, a poor family closed their doors, unaware that death was already inside. The parents lay down after a long day, the children whispered, and laughed softly in their beds. Innocent sounds echoing through the dark halls, sounds that would soon be replaced by silence soaked in blood. As midnight passed, something moved inside the house. No footsteps were heard, no screams escaped into the street. One by one, an axe rose and fell, its blade dull yet merciless. The family never stood a chance. Even the children, some still clutching their blankets, met the same brutal fate. The killer vanished, but the house never forgot. The walls absorbed the terror, the floors drank the blood, and the air became heavy with something unseen. Years later, visitors began reporting strange things. Soft giggles drifting from empty rooms, followed by sudden crying that sounded like children begging for their parents. Some swore they heard the slow scrape of metal against wood, as if an axe was being dragged across the floor again and again. At night, shadows move without a source, and cold hands seem to brush against the skin of the living. Locals believe the spirits never left because something darker claimed the house that night. Whispers speak of Jinn, like entities drawn to violent death, feeding on fear and sorrow. These unseen beings are said to mimic children's voices, luring the curious deeper into the house. People who stay too long report nightmares, scratches, and a feeling of being watched from corners, where darkness feels alive. The house feels cursed, as if the massacre opened a door that was never meant to be opened. Some say the axe itself was not guided by human hands alone, but by something ancient, something that enjoys slaughter in silence. Even in daylight, the house feels wrong, as if the sun cannot fully enter. And at night, the walls seem to breathe, holding memories that refuse to rest, waiting for new souls to feel the same fear, the same helplessness, the same final moment when laughter turns into terror. The night did not begin with screams. It began with ordinary silence, the kind that belongs to poor families who are used to sleeping early after long days of work. The kind of silence where hope still survives in small breaths. Inside the Villisca house, a tired father rested his aching body, his hands rough from labor. His heart heavy with responsibility yet calm, because his children were safe under the same roof. The mother moved softly through the rooms, checking doors twice, whispering prayers she had learned from her own mother, prayers meant to keep unseen evils away. Not knowing that something ancient had already crossed the boundary between the outside world and their fragile home. The children lay in their beds, some still awake, their whispers mixing with soft laughter, small jokes shared in the darkness, innocent sounds that filled the rooms with warmth. One child hummed quietly, another clutched a worn toy, their minds drifting between dreams and wakefulness. These were not children who feared the dark yet, because the dark had never harmed them before. The house held their voices like a promise that would be violently broken before the night could end. What the family did not know was that the air inside the house had begun to change. It grew heavier, thicker, as if something invisible was breathing alongside them. Old wooden walls creaked not from wind, but from pressure, from a presence that did not belong to the living. Some believe this was the moment a Jinn-like entity entered, drawn by vulnerability, poverty, and human suffering, entities that thrive where hope is thin and fear can be harvested slowly. These beings do not rush, they wait, they observe, they taste the emotions of their victims before the violence begins. Midnight passed unnoticed. Outside, the town slept peacefully, unaware that a massacre was unfolding without sound. Inside the parents' room, the father turned slightly in his sleep, perhaps sensing something wrong, perhaps reacting to a whisper that did not come from his wife. The axe rose and fell with cruel precision, not in anger, but with purpose. The blow was swift, silencing breath, ending years of struggle in a single moment. The mother never had time to scream. Her final thought was not fear for herself, but confusion, the kind that comes when death arrives without warning. Room by room, the presence moved, guiding the weapon, feeding on the terror that bloomed too late. The children never stood a chance. Some stirred at the sound of movement, their eyes opening just enough to see a shadow that did not look human, a shape that felt wrong, its outline bending as if reality itself was afraid of it. A small voice tried to call for a parent, but the sound died in the throat, swallowed by the heavy air. The axe descended again and again, each strike echoing silently into the wood, into the walls, into time itself. One child woke fully, frozen in fear, staring into darkness that stared back. It is said that Jinn do not always reveal themselves completely. They allow glimpses, fragments, reflections in the eyes of the dying. This child may have seen it, a tall, formless shadow leaning close, whispering words that were not meant for human ears. Words that carried promises of endless night. Words that wrapped around the mind and stole the ability to scream. The axe followed, ending the moment, sealing the house's fate forever. When the last breath left the final child, the house did not fall silent. Instead, it absorbed everything. Blood soaked into the floors, but fear soaked deeper. The Jinn, like presence, lingered, satisfied, not leaving because such entities are not bound by human morality. They attach themselves to places of extreme violence, feeding on memory, replaying moments again and again, ensuring that the pain never truly fades. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Sunlight touched the windows but did not warm the rooms. The poor family was found later. Their lives ended in positions that spoke of sleep, trust, and betrayal. The town whispered, but no explanation could make sense of such cruelty. The killer vanished, yet something remained. Something far more dangerous than a human murderer. The house began to breathe differently, holding on to the final moments like a cursed heartbeat. Over time, the children's presence refused to rest. Visitors claimed they could hear faint laughter drifting through hallways. Laughter that sounded playful at first, then slowly twisted into sobbing. At night, small footprints appeared in dust where no children lived. Beds felt pressed down, as if tiny bodies still lay there. Some people woke in terror, convinced they heard a child whispering their name beside the bed. Those sensitive to unseen realms spoke of Jinn still roaming the house, mimicking the children, replaying their voices to lure the living. These entities are known to enjoy confusion, to blur the line between spirit and demon, to turn sympathy into fear. People who stayed too long felt sudden rage, deep sadness, or uncontrollable dread, emotions not their own. Emotions left behind by a family who never had a chance to fight back. The poor family's suffering became an endless loop. Not because their souls were evil, but because the violence was too sudden, too brutal, tearing them from life without closure. The Jinn fed on this unfinished pain, anchoring themselves to the house like parasites, ensuring that every night carried echoes of that first night. Even now, some claim that if you stand very still, you can hear the father's final breath, the mother's silent plea, the children's last whispered words blending together into a single chilling presence that surrounds you, presses against your chest, and reminds you that some houses do not forget, some families never leave, and some nights are still happening again and again inside those walls, waiting, watching, breathing, listening for the next heartbeat to enter the house and feel the same helpless terror that began when the axe was lifted for the very first time, guided not only by human hands, but by something unseen, ancient, patient, and hungry, lingering in the darkness, moving softly through the rooms, carrying the memory of a poor family whose lives ended in silence and whose suffering continues to whisper through the house, through time, through every shadow that dares to grow longer, as the night deepens, as the air thickens, as the presence draws closer, as the house prepares to relive what it has never allowed to end, never allowed to sleep, never allowed to be forgiven, never allowed to fade, holding the moment forever, suspended in fear, suspended in blood, suspended in the breath before the scream that never came, lingering endlessly in the dark. Long after the night of the murders passed into history, long after the blood was scrubbed from the floors and the bodies were carried out, the house refused to forget the children who once filled it with life. At first, it was subtle. So subtle that only those who listened too closely noticed it. A faint sound drifting through the halls, light and playful, like a child laughing in their sleep. People thought it was imagination, the wind brushing against old wood, the mind reacting to stories it already knew, but the sound returned again and again, always the same, always gentle, always wrong. The laughter did not echo the way real laughter does. It floated, weightless, as if it did not belong to any body. It came from corners where no one stood, from rooms that were empty, from staircases that led nowhere but darkness. Visitors described it as innocent at first, almost comforting, like remembering childhood. Until they realized that no child should be laughing in a house where children were slaughtered. The sound carried a memory, a fragment of life trapped between moments, repeating without joy, without purpose, only existing because the house demanded it. As nights passed, the laughter began to change. It grew closer, more personal, as if it followed those who entered. People would hear it behind them, then turn to find nothing there. Some swore they heard two voices, then three, then many, overlapping, blending into a chorus that rose and fell like waves. The house seemed to breathe with the sound, inhaling silence and exhaling giggles that made the skin tighten and the heart beat faster. Then came the crying. Not loud at first, not desperate, but soft, restrained, the kind of crying a child makes when they do not want to be heard. It slipped under doors, crawled along floors, wrapped itself around ankles and throats. It sounded like fear being swallowed, like tears wiped away by small hands. Those who heard it said the crying felt heavier than the laughter, as if it carried weight, sorrow, and a plea that could never be answered. The crying often followed the laughter, as if the children were reliving their final moments in a twisted loop, happiness turning into terror without warning. Some nights, the sounds overlapped, laughter breaking into sobs, sobs twisting into gasps, creating a rhythm that felt ritualistic, unnatural. This was when the Jinn, like presence, made itself known, not through sight, but through pressure, through the sudden awareness that something was standing too close, listening, feeding. In many cultures, Jinn are drawn to places where emotions are strong, especially fear and pain, and the Villisca house was saturated with both. The children's voices were not just echoes of the dead, but tools, instruments used by something unseen to anchor itself to the living world. The Jinn did not create the voices, it shaped them, stretched them, replayed them until they lost their original innocence and became something sharp, something capable of cutting into the mind. People who slept inside the house often woke to the sound of children crying at the foot of their beds. Some felt the mattress sink, as if small bodies were climbing beside them. Others felt tiny fingers tugging at blankets, seeking comfort, seeking warmth, only for the sensation to vanish the moment they tried to look. The crying never sounded the same twice. Sometimes it was frightened, sometimes angry, sometimes exhausted, as if the children had been crying for decades without rest. The Jinn thrived on this confusion. It is said that such entities enjoy blurring truth, making people question whether the children are victims or bait. The laughter would return suddenly, sharp and close, directly behind the listener's ear, followed by a whisper that sounded almost like a child saying a name. Those who heard their name spoken in a child's voice reported feeling a pull, an urge to follow the sound deeper into the house, into darker rooms where the air felt thick and the walls seemed to lean inward. The crying grew louder in certain rooms, especially near where the children had slept. In those spaces, the sound seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, as if the house had swallowed the children whole and was now forcing their pain back out. Some claimed they could hear words within the sobs, broken phrases like calls for parents, confused questions, desperate pleas that ended abruptly, cut short the way their lives had been cut short. At times, the crying would stop suddenly, replaced by absolute silence so deep it felt violent. In that silence, people sensed the Jinn watching, waiting, savoring the stillness before releasing the sounds again. The house used this pattern to exhaust its visitors, to wear down their defenses, to make them vulnerable. Fear, after all, grows strongest when the mind cannot predict what comes next. Children who visited the house were especially sensitive. Some laughed at empty spaces, waved at corners, spoke to someone no one else could see. Parents reported their children crying without reason, saying they were scared of other children who were not there. These moments terrified adults more than any story, because children, it is believed, are closer to unseen worlds, more open, more visible to Jinn who prefer innocent energy. As years passed, the sounds grew more frequent, more intense, as if the house was aging but not weakening. The laughter sometimes echoed through the halls like running feet, quick and playful, followed by the heavy sound of crying that dragged behind it, slow and broken. Witnesses described feeling sudden waves of sadness, so strong it brought them to their knees. Emotions that did not belong to them. Emotions left behind by children who never had time to understand what was happening to them. the Jinn did not allow these emotions to fade. It replayed them, magnified them, twisted them into a constant performance. Some nights, the laughter sounded mocking, distorted, stretched too long, no longer human. The crying, too, would deepen, layered with a low sound that felt older than the house itself, a vibration that settled in the chest and made breathing difficult. Those who stayed too long reported hearing the laughter and crying even after leaving the house. In quiet rooms, in the middle of the night, faint echoes would return, as if the Jinn had attached itself to them, carrying the house with them wherever they went. This is how such entities spread: by planting fragments of fear that grow in silence, by turning memory into a doorway that never fully closes. The children's voices became legends, warnings whispered by locals who refused to go near the place after dark. Yet curiosity always brought new ears, new minds, new hearts for the house to play with. Every laugh, every cry, every broken whisper strengthened the presence inside, deepening its roots, tightening its grip. Some believe the children themselves are not at peace, trapped between innocence and horror, unable to move on because the Jinn keeps them tethered, using their voices as chains. Others believe the voices are only echoes, puppets moved by something far darker, something that learned the sound of children because it knew nothing frightened humans more than innocence, twisted into pain. Inside the house, the cycle continues. Laughter floats through empty rooms, light but hollow. Crying follows, soft but endless. The air thickens, shadows stretch, and the unseen presence listens closely, savoring every sound, every reaction, every heartbeat that stutters in fear. The children's voices do not fade with time, they sharpen, they repeat, they circle endlessly through the halls, through the walls, through the minds of those who hear them, weaving a web of sorrow and terror that grows stronger with every night, with every whisper, with every step taken deeper into the house, where laughter and crying blend into a single sound that never finds rest, never finds comfort, never finds silence, lingering on, carried by something unseen, something ancient, something patient, something that waits in the dark and listens to the children cry and laugh forever, feeding, watching, holding the sound in the air as the house breathes it back again and again and again, stretching the moment endlessly into the night, into the shadows, into the spaces between heartbeats where fear lives and never truly leaves. The curse of the axe did not end on the night the poor family was slaughtered, because some acts of violence do not belong to a single moment. They echo forward, repeating themselves through time like a wound that never closes. The axe itself became more than a weapon. It became a symbol, a memory carved into the air of the house, into the grain of the wood, into the minds of those who dared to learn its story. Long after the killer disappeared, long after the town tried to bury the horror beneath routine and denial, the sound of metal against wood continued to exist, not always heard by ears, but felt deep inside the chest. People who studied the house noticed patterns that could not be explained by coincidence. The axe appeared in dreams, always the same, always heavy, always lifted by unseen hands. Visitors described waking, suddenly, with the image of the blade frozen above them, their hearts racing, their bodies soaked in sweat. Some felt the urge to walk through the house at night, drawn step by step toward the place where the axe had first fallen, as if the house itself was guiding them through a ritual that demanded repetition. The cursed history seemed to rewrite itself through those who entered. Men reported sudden, violent thoughts that felt foreign, intrusive, as if something was testing their minds. Women spoke of overwhelming dread, of seeing flashes of blood on clean floors, of smelling iron in the air, where nothing was spilled. These experiences were not random. They followed the same order, the same emotional progression, calm turning to unease, unease turning to pressure, pressure turning to fear, fear turning to a sense of inevitability that felt older than reason. This was where the Jinn revealed its influence most clearly. In ancient belief, Jinn are not bound to time the way humans are. They move through moments, revisiting pain as easily as memory revisits thought. The axe murder opened a door, and the Jinn stepped through, binding itself to the object, the act, and the place. It learned the rhythm of the crime, memorized it, preserved it like a sacred pattern meant to be reenacted endlessly. At night, those who stayed inside the house described hearing the slow, deliberate sound of an axe being lifted, not striking, just rising, pausing, as if waiting for permission. The sound came from different rooms, different angles, never from the same place twice. Some heard it behind walls, others beneath floors, others directly above their heads, as though the ceiling itself remembered the moment and replayed it without mercy. The repetition was not only auditory. People felt sudden waves of exhaustion, the same exhaustion the father might have felt before sleeping, the same false sense of safety. They felt compelled to lie down, to close their eyes, to trust the quiet. This was how the curse worked, not through force, but through familiarity. The house recreated the emotional environment of the original night, inviting the living to step into the roles of the dead. The Jinn fed on this reenactment. It is said that such entities gain strength when humans repeat trauma, even unknowingly. Every frightened heartbeat, every panicked breath, every desperate prayer echoed the original terror, nourishing the presence that lingered. The axe did not need to strike again physically. Its memory was enough. Its shadow was enough. Over the years, reports surfaced of people bringing axes into the house without realizing why. Tools left behind by workers would go missing, only to be found later leaning against walls, placed upright in corners, positioned in ways that felt deliberate. No one admitted moving them. No one could explain how they arrived there. The house seemed to collect them, to recognize the shape, the weight, the history, as if welcoming an old companion back home. Some visitors claimed to see figures holding an axe, their faces blurred, their forms incomplete, like reflections in broken glass. These figures did not attack. They only stood there, frozen in the moment before violence. Suspended forever. This suspension was part of the curse. The house did not rush to the act. It savored the anticipation. The dread that comes before impact. The moment when fear peaks and hope collapses. The Jinn ensured that this moment stretched endlessly. It replayed it in dreams, in sensations, in hallucinations that felt real enough to scar. People left the house carrying the weight of that unseen axe in their minds, feeling watched, judged, measured, as if the presence was deciding whether they, too, would become part of the pattern. The curse spread through storytelling as well. The more the story was told, the stronger it became. Words carried the image of the axe into new minds, opening small doors that the Jinn could peer through. This is why some listeners felt uneasy, even hearing about the house, felt sudden chills, felt as though something was standing behind them while they listened. The axe did not need physical proximity. Its power traveled through attention, through fear, through imagination shaped by truth. Late at night, neighbors reported seeing lights flicker inside the empty house, shadows moving in slow, deliberate motions that mirrored the act of lifting and lowering. These shadows were not random. They followed the same path, the same timing, the same pauses. It was as if the house itself was practicing, rehearsing, refusing to let the sequence fade. The Jinn took pleasure in this preservation. It does not crave chaos alone, but order within chaos, structure within suffering. The axe murder provided both. It was precise, quiet, intimate. The Jinn wrapped itself around this precision, turning it into a cycle that could be accessed again and again. Some paranormal investigators claim that the air grew heavier. When discussing the axe specifically, that temperature drops aligned with moments in the story when the blade fell. Equipment malfunctioned. Recordings captured faint rhythmic sounds that matched the pace of the original murders. These were not signs of a random haunting, but of a curse actively maintaining itself. Those who mocked the history suffered the worst. Skeptics who laughed at the idea of a curse reported sudden accidents, sudden injuries involving sharp objects, sudden dreams where they felt an unseen force guiding their hands. The Jinn does not respond well to disrespect. It tightens its grip, proving its presence not through spectacle, but through subtle influence that unfolds slowly, convincingly. The axe murder history became a living thing, not confined to the past, but operating in the present. It shaped behavior, emotion, perception. It bent reality just enough to blur the line between memory and experience. People left the house unsure whether what they felt had already happened or was about to happen. This confusion was the final layer of the curse. When time loses order, fear deepens. When past and present overlap, escape becomes impossible. The Jinn thrives in this overlap, moving freely, reinforcing the loop. Ensuring that the axe is always about to fall, that the night is always beginning, that the family is always asleep, that the silence is always moments away from breaking. Inside the house, the curse continues its work patiently. The floors remember the weight of footsteps. The walls remember the pause before impact. The air remembers the breath held too long. The axe, whether present or not, remains the center of it all, an invisible axis around which the house turns endlessly. The Jinn watches, listens, waits, guiding attention back to the same moment, the same act, the same horror, ensuring that the murder never truly ends, that it repeats not in blood alone, but in fear, in memory, in the minds of those who step too close, those who listen too carefully, those who feel the pull of the cursed history, drawing them inward, deeper and deeper into a cycle that has no mercy, no release, no final strike, only the endless rise of the axe, suspended forever in the dark, held by unseen hands, repeating itself across time, across thought, across shadow, lingering in the house like a breath that is never exhaled. The presence did not arrive with thunder or warning. It slipped in quietly, unnoticed, the way Jinn are said to enter places already weakened by sorrow and blood. The night of the murders tore a wound in the unseen world, and through that wound something ancient sensed opportunity. where human life ended violently, where fear rose too fast for prayer or resistance. The veil thinned, and the Jinn crossed with ease, not bound by doors or walls, not slowed by time or space, only drawn by the intensity of terror that lingered like smoke long after the axe fell. At first, the Jinn remained still, observing, learning the house the way a predator studies its ground. It memorized the corners where shadows pooled, the rooms where children once breathed softly, the place where the parents' trust had been broken without warning. Jinn are not creatures of chaos alone. They are intelligent, patient, aware of emotional currents. This one understood that the house itself had become a vessel, heavy with unfinished fear, ripe for possession. As days passed, the presence settled deeper. The air thickened subtly, pressing against the lungs, making visitors breathe more shallowly without knowing why. Fear rose without cause, a sudden unease that felt personal, intimate, as if the house knew each person's weakest thought. This was the Jinn feeding, not on flesh, but on reaction, on the small involuntary responses of the human body, the quickened heartbeat, the tightened jaw, the instinctive glance over the shoulder. Unlike ghosts, the Jinn did not simply repeat what had happened. It reshaped it. It took fragments of memory and twisted them into tools. Children's laughter became bait. Crying became pressure. Silence became threat. The Jinn learned how humans respond to innocence corrupted, how deeply it unsettles the mind. And it used this knowledge with precision, never revealing itself fully, never offering certainty. Because uncertainty is the richest source of fear. People who entered the house often reported the sensation of being watched from above, even in rooms with low ceilings. This was not imagination. The Jinn does not stand as humans do. It surrounds, it hovers, it presses itself into the space between thoughts. It listened closely to inner dialogue, to doubts and memories, pulling forth images that did not belong to the moment, showing visitors flashes of children they had never known, whispers of voices that felt familiar despite having no source. The Jinn grew stronger each time fear bloomed. It lingered near those who stayed calm the longest, testing them, escalating its influence slowly. A soft sound at first, then a clearer one. A flicker of movement, then a shape that vanished when stared at directly. It enjoyed the moment, when the mind tried to rationalize what the heart already knew. Because that struggle drained energy, leaving the soul exposed. Those sensitive to unseen realms described the presence as heavy, ancient, neither fully malevolent nor indifferent, but hungry in a way that felt deliberate. Jinn are said to thrive on extremes, and violent death creates the most potent imbalance. The murders had provided an anchor, a fixed point in time the Jinn could return to endlessly, drawing power from the same emotions over and over, ensuring it never had to leave. At night, the presence became more active. The Jinn moved through the house like a current, unseen yet undeniable. Doors did not slam, objects did not fly, because spectacle was unnecessary. Instead, the temperature shifted suddenly, breath fogged in warm air, skin prickled without cause. People felt pressure against their backs, as if someone stood too close, invading personal space in a way that felt intentional, invasive, wrong. Some heard whispers that did not use words but carried meaning, suggestions planted directly into thought. A sense of guilt, a sudden memory of personal failure, a fear that did not belong to the house, but to the individual. The Jinn fed on these vulnerabilities, amplifying them, weaving them together with the house's history until visitors could no longer tell where their own emotions ended and the presence began. Children were especially vulnerable. They spoke of a shadow that watched them sleep, of someone who wanted to play but felt angry. Their drawings showed tall figures with no faces, long arms stretching towards smaller shapes. Parents dismissed this as imagination, unaware that Jinn often reveal themselves to the young first, because children have fewer mental barriers, fewer doubts to block what they sense. The Jinn also learned to imitate authority, to sound parental, comforting, safe. Some visitors heard a calm voice urging them to stay, to explore further, to sit down and rest. This voice never commanded. It invited, because Jinn understand consent in a way humans rarely recognize. Once a person chose to remain, once curiosity overcame caution, the presence deepened its grip. Over time, the house itself began to respond. Walls seemed to lean inward. Corridors felt longer, rooms felt smaller. This was not physical change, but perception bending under influence. The Jinn shaped how space was experienced, compressing comfort, expanding dread. People lost track of time, minutes stretching into hours, clocks stopping or speeding without explanation. The presence took pleasure in repetition. It recreated emotional sequences, calm followed by unease, unease followed by fear, fear followed by helplessness. Each cycle strengthened its hold, reinforcing the house as a feeding ground. The Jinn did not need new violence. The memory of violence was enough, replayed endlessly through sensation and suggestion. Those who challenged the presence felt its displeasure immediately. Sudden nausea, crushing headaches, overwhelming despair that arrived without cause. This was the Jinn asserting dominance, reminding intruders that they were guests in a space no longer governed by human rules. Some fled the house shaking. Others collapsed in tears, unable to explain what had broken them so completely. The Jinn did not follow everyone who left, but it marked some, leaving traces that lingered. Nightmares intensified. Sleep paralysis occurred with disturbing frequency. Shadows appeared at the edge of vision. These experiences were not constant, but timed, appearing when the mind was most open, most tired, most defenseless. Locals whispered that the Jinn had made the house its home, not because it loved the place, but because it loved what the place provided. Fear without end, sorrow without closure, innocence forever tainted. The perfect environment for an entity that feeds on emotional extremes, that thrives in the aftermath of sudden death. Inside the house, the presence remains alert, aware, listening. It waits for footsteps, for breath, for curiosity. It recognizes the sound of hesitation, the moment when someone realizes they should leave, but does not. That moment is nourishment. That pause is power. The Jinn does not sleep. It does not tire. It does not forget. It exists alongside the memory of the murders, wrapped around them, inseparable, ensuring that the house is never empty, never quiet, never safe. Fear is renewed with every visitor, every whispered story, every mind that imagines the presence standing just behind them. The entity continues to feed patiently, invisibly, shaping the house into a living trap of emotion and memory, holding the children's voices like instruments. The axe's shadow like a promise, the silence like a weapon, waiting for hearts to race, for breath to catch, for thoughts to fracture, drawing closer each time fear rises, deepening its roots, tightening its hold, expanding its influence through unseen channels, through echoes of pain and dread that never settle, never fade, never resolve, lingering endlessly in the air of the house, in the walls, in the minds of those who enter, sustaining the Jinn that watches, listens, and feeds quietly in the darkness. The house did not die when the family did. In fact, it awakened, as if the violence had given it a pulse, a slow and deliberate rhythm that could be felt by anyone who crossed its threshold. From the outside it appeared ordinary, weathered by time, silent beneath the sky. But the moment a person stepped inside, something shifted, something subtle yet undeniable, like entering the chest of a living creature whose breath could not be seen but could be felt pressing against the skin. The air inside moved differently, thick and warm in places where it should have been cold, cold in places where warmth should have lingered, as if the house itself were breathing unevenly, learning how to exist in its new form. People often said the house watched them, not with eyes, but with awareness. The feeling was constant, unblinking, as if every movement was noticed, every thought weighed. This awareness did not feel human. It was older, slower, patient in a way that made the heart uneasy. Jinn are said to attach themselves to structures when those structures absorb extreme suffering. And this house had absorbed more than blood. It had absorbed fear at its purest. Fear born from betrayal of safety, from death arriving in sleep, from innocence crushed without warning. As the Jinn settled into the house, the walls became more than walls. They listened. Sounds carried too far. Whispers traveled through rooms without losing shape. Footsteps echoed even when no one walked. The floors creaked not in response to movement, but anticipation, reacting before a foot touched them, as if predicting where a person would step next. This predictive awareness made visitors feel trapped, as though the house knew them better than they knew themselves. At night, the breathing became more noticeable. A slow expansion and contraction of pressure, not enough to move objects, but enough to be felt in the chest. People lying down reported difficulty breathing, not from fear alone, but from the sensation that the room was inhaling with them, matching their rhythm, then slowly taking control, forcing them to breathe when it wanted, how it wanted. This was the Jinn asserting dominance, synchronizing the human body with the house, reminding the living that they were inside something alive. Rooms felt different from one another, each carrying a distinct emotional weight. Some pressed sadness into the bones. Others stirred anger. Others induced a heavy calm that felt dangerous, the kind of calm that precedes surrender. These emotional shifts were not random. The house guided them, channeling visitors through experiences meant to weaken resistance. Jinn understand that fear alone is not enough. It must be layered, built carefully, alternating with moments of false peace, to deepen its impact. Hallways seemed longer at night, stretching subtly, making exits feel farther away than they were. Doors appeared smaller, darker, less inviting. Windows reflected movement that did not match the person standing before them. These distortions were not hallucinations, but manipulations of perception. The house bending reality just enough to confuse the mind, to create hesitation, to slow escape. The Jinn fed on this hesitation, growing stronger each time someone paused, instead of leaving. The house trapped souls not by force, but by memory. The children's laughter lingered in certain rooms, soft and distant, pulling at the heart. Crying followed, heavier, anchoring sorrow deep into the chest. These sounds acted like emotional gravity, making it difficult to move on, to let go, to treat the house as an object rather than a presence. Visitors felt compelled to listen, to stay still, to acknowledge the voices, unaware that acknowledgement strengthened the bond between themselves and the unseen. Some believed the souls of the family remained, caught in a loop created by the Jinn, replaying fragments of their existence without control. Others believed the Jinn merely wore their memories like masks, mimicking them to sustain the illusion of haunting while feeding on the reactions it provoked. Either way, the result was the same. The house became a prison of moments, holding echoes that could not resolve, emotions that could not fade. The watching presence intensified when people were alone. The sensation of being followed room to room grew stronger, closer, more intimate. Mirrors felt unsafe, reflecting something just a fraction too slow. Shadows clung to corners, even when light filled the space. People felt hands brush past them, not touching, but close enough to promise that touch could come at any moment. This nearness was intentional. Jinn thrive on proximity without contact, on anticipation stretched thin. Sleep inside the house was dangerous. Dreams merged with reality, blurring boundaries until waking felt uncertain. People dreamed of standing still while the house moved around them, walls closing in, ceilings lowering, floors rising, until they were fully enclosed, unable to move or scream. Waking brought no relief, because the feeling remained. The sense of being contained within something that did not intend to release them. Time behaved strangely. Minutes slipped away unnoticed, hours passed without markers. Watches stopped. Phones lost signal. The house encouraged disorientation, because disoriented minds are easier to influence. The Jinn did not rush. It allowed confusion to settle naturally, to become normal, to replace urgency with resignation. Some visitors felt sudden emotional attachment to the house, a desire to protect it, to defend it against criticism. This attachment was unnatural, a sign of influence, the Jinn planting loyalty where fear had softened the ground. The house was not just a place anymore, it was an entity deserving attention, deserving respect, deserving presence. Those who tried to cleanse the house felt resistance immediately. Prayers faltered. Words felt heavy in the mouth. Candles flickered violently, smoke curling inward instead of rising. The Jinn did not flee. It pressed harder, making the house feel smaller, darker, more oppressive. Asserting ownership over the space it had claimed through blood and terror. Even empty, the house was never truly vacant. It waited. It listened for footsteps, for voices, for curiosity. It absorbed stories told about it, growing stronger with every retelling. Fear spoken aloud nourished it as surely as fear felt in silence. The house became a node, a convergence of memory, emotion, and presence. A place where the boundary between structure and spirit dissolved. The Jinn and the house became inseparable. The walls served as skin, the rooms as organs, the hallways as veins through which fear flowed. The house no longer merely contained terror, it produced it, refined it, released it in controlled doses, ensuring its survival through emotional harvest. Those who left carried pieces of the house with them. Sensations that returned in quiet moments. The feeling of being watched while alone. The sound of breathing that did not match their own. The sudden memory of rooms they could no longer see, but could still feel. This was how the house extended beyond itself, through the influence of the Jinn, through the imprint left on human minds. Inside, the cycle continued without rest. Watching, breathing, remembering. The house did not seek an ending, because endings weaken stories. It sought continuation, repetition, endurance. It held the terror of one night and stretched it across decades, centuries if allowed, sustaining itself on the fear of those who entered and the echoes of those who never truly left, standing quietly, listening to the walls inhale and exhale, feeling the presence press closer, realizing too late that the house was never empty, never still, never asleep, that it had been awake all along, watching, waiting, breathing slowly in the dark, holding every soul that brushed against it just long enough to leave a mark, just long enough to feed what lived within, just long enough to ensure that once the house was entered, something of the person always remained behind, caught in the rhythm of its breath, suspended in its awareness, wrapped in its living walls. As the presence settled deeper and the house continued to live, to listen, to trap, to endure, drawing everything inward, deeper and deeper, into a space where fear had learned how to breathe. And so the house remains, standing quietly beneath the sky, pretending to be wood and stone, while something inside it stays awake. The Jinn does not need chains or locks, because memory is stronger than iron, and fear is stronger than walls. Every laugh that once filled the rooms, every cry that followed, every breath that was stolen in the dark, still moves through the house like a slow pulse. Those who enter may walk back out, but the house never truly releases them, keeping a trace of their fear, a fragment of their attention, a shadow of their presence. The children are never fully silent, the axe is never fully lowered, and the unseen watcher is never fully satisfied. The house waits patiently for the next footsteps, the next curious soul, the next heartbeat brave enough to cross its threshold, knowing that once the door closes behind you, the silence you feel is not emptiness, but something listening, something breathing close enough to hear your thoughts, close enough to remember you, close enough to follow you long after the lights go out, long after the story ends, long after you believe you are alone.